don't get a lot of firsts these days, but for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas.
It addresses two key priorities for the current government. One, trade diversification, which is the new mantra in response to Trump's tariffs.
There was no loud press conference. No bold announcement, just a quiet but firm move from Ottawa that made even the White House sit up and take notice. When the U.S. president asked for more oil, Canada did not answer with words, it answered with action, tightened the taps, turned the flow elsewhere, and signed new energy deals with Europe and Asia, a silent but strategic shift. This move is redrawing the global energy map and leaving America to deal with its own tightening supply lines. In April 2025, Canada's crude oil exports to the U.S. dropped by 15.7%, marking the biggest decline in 3 straight months. By May, only 68% of Canadian crude was headed south of the border, the lowest level in 40 years, and more than 10 percentage points below the same time last year. The reason? New tariffs from the U.S., which raised taxes on fuel and raw materials. That pushed many Canadian oil companies to look elsewhere. Today, only about 45% of the oil running through the Trans Mountain Expansion TMX pipeline ends up in the U.S. The rest is now flowing toward Europe and Asia, where there are no tariffs, and, in fact, some trade partners even offer tax breaks under free trade agreements. This shift means American drivers, especially in northern states like Washington and Michigan, which used to rely heavily on Canadian oil, could soon feel a pinch. If filling your tank used to cost around $65, you might be looking at $70 to $72 in the coming week, depending on where you live, as supply tightens and import costs climb. If you found this update helpful, feel free to give it a like and hit subscribe so you don't miss future breakdowns like this one. The TMX pipeline officially started operating in May 2024, with a transport capacity of around 890,000 barrels per day. This was a game changer. Canada no longer had to send most of its oil through the U.S. instead. It could go straight to the Pacific and deliver to energy-hungry markets in Asia, places like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. And it is not just oil. On June 30th, Canada successfully shipped its first batch of liquefied natural gas (LNG) from the LNG Canada facility in Kitmadi, British Columbia. That marked Canada's official debut as a new LNG supplier for Asia. Cutting out the U.S. middleman means better profits for Canadian companies and more stable pricing for Asian buyers, with fewer political strings attached. As more energy heads to Asia, the U.S. market will see its share trimmed. That could lead to a noticeable rise in heating costs for some American households this winter. For instance, a family in Minnesota who paid $210 per month for heating last January might see that go up to between $240 and $250, simply because Canada's supply is now flowing to higher-paying buyers overseas, instead of getting stuck in long, uncertain negotiations with the U.S. Canada is building a whole new web of trade partnerships. Thanks to the CETA agreement, the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement, nearly all import taxes on Canadian crude oil into Europe have been lifted. This makes Canadian oil competitive with heavyweights like Saudi Arabia and even the US in the European market. But Ottawa is not stopping there. Through the CPTPP Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, Canada is also boosting oil and LNG exports to countries like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, markets that are currently short on energy and willing to pay a premium for a stable supply. Thanks to the TMX pipeline and the now operational LNG Canada terminal, Canada is stepping onto the world stage as a serious energy player, one that does not have to lean on the U.S. anymore. As Canada gradually steps out of America's energy orbit, Washington could lose a strategic supply source right on its doorstep. That is not just a national security issue, it is also a pocketbook issue. A gallon of gas in California now runs about $4.70. If the supply crunch drags on, prices could jump to $5.20 or more by this fall, directly impacting the travel costs and shipping expenses for millions of Americans.
We handle about 300,000 pounds of tomatoes. With the tariffs going on right now, we kind of don't know where we're going to be.
There's been loopholes that the Mexican tomato producers have taken advantage of and continue to price dump or lower the prices below the cost of production here in the United States and in Alabama.
If they send the tomatoes over and it's supposed to be a set price and they need to move tomatoes, well, they may just give a load of bell pepper for free for them to take the tomatoes. So it's never really worked.
But it is about to shake up the entire food market in the U.S., and hardly anyone is talking about it. After a sudden move by Mexico, America's billion-dollar tomato industry just lost its main supplier. And Canada, they wasted no time stepping in. Prices are climbing. The supply chain is wobbling. And in just a few weeks, that salsa you eat with nachos might cost you nearly twice as much. So what is going on, and why could this hit your grocery bill right in the wallet? On July 14th, the U.S. Department of Commerce officially pulled out of the tomato suspension agreement that had been in place since 2019 and slapped a 17% anti-dumping tariff on all fresh tomatoes imported from Mexico. It was an unexpected decision and a big one, since Mexico currently supplies around 70% of all fresh tomatoes sold in the U.S., which adds up to over $3 billion in exports each year. Large producers like Nature Sweet say they will have no choice but to raise retail prices by about 10% to make up for the new tax, and in the end, it is consumers who will have to foot the bill. In other words, if you bought a pack of cherry tomatoes from Mexico for $4 at Whole Foods last week, next week you might be paying close to $4.40, and that increase will ripple through to everything from salads and burgers to pizza and spaghetti sauce. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, the new tariff is expected to cause Mexican tomato exports to the U.S. to drop by at least 5% in 2025. That might not sound like much, but we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and the livelihoods of nearly 500,000 workers in Mexico's agricultural supply chain. In the state of Sinaloa, often called the California of Mexico for its massive tomato output, many farms have already begun scaling back operations out of fear of losing big U.S. orders. Meanwhile, over at the U.S. border, importers in Texas, especially around the Laredo area, which used to generate over $8.3 billion and 32,000 jobs through agricultural trade, are scrambling to find alternative sources. If this trend continues, thousands of small businesses and food distributors across the region could be seriously affected. Just days after the new tariff took effect, tomato prices in major cities like Raleigh, Los Angeles, and Chicago began rising quickly, all within less than 2 weeks. With Mexico accounting for 70% of America's fresh tomato supply, the supply chain has taken a hit. From salads at fast food joints to salsa in Mexican restaurants, even the ketchup on your burger could see changes. Some big-name brands like Heinz and DiGiorno are now looking into switching to tomatoes grown in the U.S. or Canada. But domestic production simply cannot fill the gap, at least not anytime soon. The result? Smaller restaurant chains, local grocery stores, and even school cafeterias, all working with tight budgets, are being forced to cut portions, raise prices, or switch to alternative ingredients with just one tariff decision. A domino effect is now spreading through America's entire food ecosystem, and this may just be the beginning.
How can we find a way to support each other, and then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets?
Did you know that the Ford you're driving or the dishwasher you're planning to buy next month might no longer be made in the U.S.? It didn't take a major blow from a foreign competitor. America is weakening its own manufacturing base as more and more major companies quietly move operations north, choosing Canada as their new home. In just the past 18 months, more than $7.2 billion in investment from major players like GM, Ford, Tesla, and Alcoa has quietly flowed into Canada. It's not about cheaper labor, it's about lower total costs. In Canada, industrial electricity runs around 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. about 45% cheaper than in US manufacturing states like Ohio or Michigan. Add to that, the faster approvals getting a factory built in Canada takes months, not years like it often does in the US, especially for industries like clean energy or battery production. One example, Honda is planning a 15 billion Canadian dollars, about 11 billion US dollars, electric vehicle and battery complex in Ontario, backed by major funding from both the Canadian federal and provincial governments. Earlier, Stellantis, which owns Chrysler, secured over 1 billion Canadian dollars for its battery plant in Windsor. So what does that mean for everyday Americans? It's simple. Jobs that might have landed in Michigan or Georgia are now heading to Canada. Each complex like Honda's can mean 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, gone from the US, not just factory jobs, but construction work, parts suppliers, and shipping and logistics roles. If you live in a town that's long relied on industry like Toledo, OH or Flint, MI losing a plant might mean fewer diners staying open, daycares shutting down early, or even local home prices falling because no one's moving in anymore. The US decision to raise steel tariffs to 50% has already triggered a real spike in material costs. Right after President Trump's announcement, hot rolled coil HRC, a core material for many industries, jumped about 6%, or $240 per ton. Aluminum, used in everything from food packaging to cars and electronics, shot past $1,279 per ton, up over 20% since January. For automakers, that's painful. A pickup truck like the Ford F-150 or Chevy Silverado now costs nearly $5,700 more in materials alone without any extra bells or whistles. If you were planning to buy a truck for around $45,000, that price could easily cross $50,000. And it's not because the vehicle got better, it's just the taxes. And it's not just about price tags, it's about jobs. In places like Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia, factories are getting fewer orders because they can't compete with Canada's lower costs. Some Georgia plants have gone from 3 shifts to just 1. And reports show over 3,500 workers have either been furloughed or laid off in just the last 6 months. For the rest of us, it shows up in rising prices on anything that uses metal, from soda cans to fridges to washing machines. That $799 dishwasher you were eyeing, next month, it might cost $850 to $875, simply because of tariffs and more expensive raw materials. While the US wrestles with rising tariffs and shifting investment, Canada is stepping up fast, becoming North America's new high-tech hub. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec are now being called Battery Valley, with massive projects in EV batteries, clean energy, and electronic components taking root. Swedish firm Northvolt is investing $5.2 billion in a mega battery plant in Quebec, expected to create 3,000 to 6,000 skilled jobs. According to Economic Minister Pierre Fitzgibbon, they're tapping into Canada's low-cost hydroelectric grid and government incentives that include extended tax breaks and easier approval processes for key materials like nickel and lithium. Both crucial for battery manufacturing, Canada's strategy is about more than foreign money. They're building a fully domestic supply chain, from mining and refining to assembly and recycling. That gives them protection from fragile global supply lines and an edge when dealing with carbon regulations from the US and Europe. As companies shift north, skilled American workers, especially in tech, engineering, and battery systems, face fewer opportunities. And the price of American-made goods may keep rising if we end up importing parts from Canada at higher costs. So if you're wondering why job listings in your town are drying up, or why your next microwave is $40 more than the last one, you might just need to look a few hundred miles north.
I think fear of border patrol situation is definitely deterring a lot of tourists.
It's not just tourists who've disappeared, so has our revenue. Just weeks into 2025, thousands fewer cars and shoppers are crossing the US-Canada border, and communities from Buffalo to Niagara are feeling the shockwaves. Lost jobs, shrinking sales, and rising costs for families. There was a time when a quick trip over the Peace Bridge was just part of daily life for folks living along the border. But this February and March, more than 35,000 fewer vehicles crossed at Buffalo's Peace Bridge, and nearly 30,000 fewer crossed the Rainbow Bridge. Compared to last year, you don't need a spreadsheet to feel the change. Local diners are quieter, and shopkeepers see fewer faces each week. Erie County's tax revenue is already down 7%, forcing town halls into tough decisions. Cut clinic budgets, delay road repairs, or reduce police overtime. For homeowners and retirees, these aren't just numbers. They mean the library closes early or doctor visits take longer. As funds tighten, families feel it at the register. Groceries and gas rise maybe $10 or $15 more a month. But enough to notice, small businesses quietly let part-time staff go, hoping for a rebound before summer. It's a chain reaction, started by fewer cars on the bridge. Felt right at home. Not long ago, American brands filled Canadian homes from cereal to kitchen gadgets. Now, with 78% of Canadians vowing to buy local and 59% avoiding US products, a new attitude is emerging. It's more than patriotism, even Amazon feels it, as 41% consider leaving the platform. For middle-aged Americans with Canadian ties, the effects are clear. Returns from Canada are falling. Savings buy less. And shopping habits must adjust. Back home, this means prices for some American staples are up 3 to 5% as brands try to offset Canadian losses. So expect to pay a few dollars more for things like paper towels or coffee. E-commerce firms could see $20 to $30 million less revenue next quarter. Ultimately, it's not just politics, it's a new kind of squeeze at the store. Remember when border towns buzzed with Canadians? And every fast food spot filled up after hockey games or shopping sprees. This year, it's quieter McDonald's. Wendy's and Burger King say they've lost hundreds of millions, mostly from Canadians staying home. For middle-aged managers and franchise owners, empty dining rooms mean tough choices. Many are cutting shifts. Some staff lose hours entirely. Families depending on those paychecks now face new worries. Staffing costs are down 10 to 15%, so each location might cut 3 to 5 jobs just to survive. Losing work at a burger joint isn't headline news. But for those in their 40s and 50s balancing bills and tuition, it's a serious hit. The golden arches remain, but business is far from booming. Canadians have long visited the US for concerts, holidays, and shopping, but this February, travel plunged. Air arrivals fell 13%. Land visits dropped 23%. The impact? Roughly $2 billion lost revenue and 14,000 jobs, mainly in hotels, restaurants, theaters, and campus roles. For tourism workers, it's more than a quarterly figure. It can mean making or missing the mortgage. Businesses report monthly losses of $150 to $200 and are cutting 10 to 15, mostly part-time or seasonal jobs. For families relying on those paychecks, the downturn hits home, showing that when Canadians stay away, U.S. Main Streets feel it, too.
The new spending law changes how Americans pay for education at every level. One provision affects school vouchers with a possible ripple effect on public school funding. Another targets large university endowments, bringing a new tax reality to higher education.
You might get a few $100s back for giving to charity, but you could also lose thousands if your child is aiming for a top university. Trump's new tax law is changing how we fund both education and our communities. The real question is, who stands to benefit and who could be left behind? Starting in 2027, the One Big Beautiful Bill introduces a dollar-for-dollar tax credit up to $1,700 a year for donations to K-12 private school scholarship programs. This replaces the old system of regular deductions. With no federal cap on the total credits available, some experts estimate the government could end up covering as much as $100 billion annually. For families with no children in private school, this means public school funding may take a hit, especially in programs supporting students with disabilities. For example, if a student needs an aide at $20 per hour, budget cuts might reduce that support, directly affecting the classroom learning experience. Also in 2020, universities with large endowments will face higher taxes under the new law. Schools holding more than $750,000 per student in endowment funds will pay a 4% tax. Those with over $2 million per student will pay 8%, a sharp increase from the current 1.4%. However, colleges with fewer than 3,000 tuition-paying students, like Amherst or Wellesley, are exempt no matter how large their endowment. For top universities like Harvard, with an endowment over $50 billion, the new law could cost $200 to $280 million a year, enough to fund hundreds of scholarships or entire research programs. Even schools like Rice University expect to pay more than $10 million annually. roughly the value of 100 full scholarships. To adapt, many universities have started freezing hiring, delaying raises, and slowing student enrollment growth. Families sending students to top-tier schools may notice tighter financial aid, fewer scholarships, and less generous tuition offsets. If you're planning for an Ivy League education, you might need to budget several $1,000s more per year than previous classes did. Beginning in 2026, the law also introduces a charitable deduction for non-itemizers up to $1,000 for individuals and $2,000 for couples. For the first time, over 90% of Americans who use the standard tax form will be eligible for this kind of deduction. That means if you normally give $500 to charity but don't itemize your taxes, you can still reduce your taxable income by $500 and possibly get $50 to $100 back at tax time. It's a practical way to reward everyday generosity. But wealthier donors and businesses face tighter limits. High-income individuals can only deduct up to 35% of their adjusted gross income AGI and must subtract 0.5% AGI from their donation total. For businesses, the reduction is 1% of AGI. Experts estimate this could reduce large-scale charitable giving by about $81 billion over the next decade. If you've noticed major donations from big companies or wealthy individuals to museums, arts programs, or research institutions, those contributions may become less frequent. This could leave some of those organizations needing to pause or revise plans if they cannot find replacement funding.
Well, one gets up in the morning and you get up with fear because many of us can leave our house and we probably won't come back.
Changing course for the American food supply. Your local supermarket's bread shelf is suddenly stacked with loaves from Canada and cans of corn stamped product of Brazil. Sounds strange, but that's exactly what's happening across America's heartland. As U.S. farms slow down and shoppers face higher prices and fewer choices. Peon. Empty fields in Nebraska. There was a time when bread was a simple comfort, a warm loaf at dinner, a staple for busy mornings or late snacks. But this year in Nebraska, wheat fields are increasingly left empty, with wheat prices at a 5-year low of $5 per bushel and exports down $350 million this quarter. Unsold U.S. wheat is piling up. Even Canadian supermarkets now avoid product of U.S., leaving shelves short on basics like bread. For middle-aged families and retirees, each grocery trip brings new worries. Fewer choices, less freshness, and the uneasy sense that bread is slipping out of reach. As more land lies unused, supplies shrink. The facts are stark. Bread and bakery prices are set to rise 15%, adding $30 a month for families trying to keep their kitchens stocked. Even familiar foods can become precious. One policy change can be felt in every slice. Not long ago, California's fields fed millions with fresh greens. Now, a different scene. Produce wilting on the vine and harvest crews gone. Migrant worker visas have dropped 12%. Logistics costs are up 18%. And crops are left to rot. Texas floods and disaster response budget cuts make things worse. For retirees and families, finding vegetables can mean a 30-mile drive for lettuce or tomatoes. Each mile and dollar adds to the frustration. Soon, local produce prices may jump 20%, raising a typical family's weekly grocery bill by $25. That crisp salad now costs more and feels bittersweet, knowing how much is wasted. When American farms slow down, shockwaves ripple through the food chain. Processing plants and storage sites from Idaho to Kansas now run at half speed, and thousands of logistics and packaging workers are losing shifts. At the center is milk, a staple for families each morning. Small diners and markets, pressured by rising costs. Pass increases to customers. Bread and dairy prices have jumped 15%, costing households about $30 more monthly just for milk. Behind each gallon is more than a price. Small food businesses now spend $50 extra a month on logistics and packaging, while families see an extra $5 to $10 weekly on groceries. For many, pouring a glass of milk now feels more careful, more precious. Walk down a supermarket aisle in the Midwest these days and you might spot a quiet change. Canned corn from Brazil, filling in where American brands once stood, as Canada steps up agricultural exports. More than 1,500 containers of U.S. corn and soy have been rejected overseas this year, while Canadian funds are buying up tens of thousands of acres of U.S. farmland. For American families, especially those in their 40s and 50s, this is more than just a label change. The cost of staple foods, like canned corn, is now edging higher. Experts estimate an extra $50 a year just for basics. Not yet. The price isn't the only thing on their minds. There's a growing sense that the story behind their food is shifting, and that the future of the American harvest is suddenly less certain than ever before.
We're selling it for like 40% more just because it's cost so much to get, right? And there's less in stock because people aren't buying this.
Imagine you're running a small auto body shop. Overnight, steel costs shoot up 6 to 9%. Parts orders stall, and workers are sent home early. Sounds absurd, right? But that's exactly what's happening in Detroit, where Canada's silent strike on procurement rules is rippling through U.S. automotive supply chains. A Michigan small business owner opens his shop, only to find this week's steel delivery is delayed again. He's heard friends in nearby towns having similar trouble. Why are steel shelves suddenly empty? And why do prices keep rising? Recently, the U.S. placed a 50% tariff on imported steel and aluminum from Canada. Using Section 232, Canada chose not to fight back with tariffs, but instead quietly changed government buying rules and increased environmental requirements, making it harder for U.S. buyers to get Canadian steel. This has left truckers, warehouse workers, and steel plant crews in cities like Detroit with less to do. Some are called in for fewer shifts. Others watch overtime hours disappear as prices inch upward. Families start to worry if everyday costs will soon follow. For those who rely on steady pay, this uncertainty makes planning for monthly bills more challenging, and conversations at dinner tables start to shift toward cost cutting. If this pattern stays over the next 2 months, an estimated 1,500 steelworkers and drivers in the Midwest may face reduced hours or temporary layoffs as factories scramble for supplies. Even small changes in work schedules can quickly add up, putting extra pressure on households and local businesses that depend on these industries to keep moving. Chaos. The summer brings an uneasy quiet to assembly plants, where once machines ran day and night. Now some lines sit idle waiting for steel shipments that do not arrive on schedule. Ford reports a jump of $2.5 billion in added costs just since the start of the year, driven by shortages and delays. Steel and aluminum prices have risen between 6 and 9% in the last few weeks, eating into company profits and slowing production across Michigan. Factory managers are forced to cut back shifts, while some suppliers consider temporary closures to wait out the shortage. For households depending on those jobs, a single missed paycheck can mean tough choices about groceries, medical bills, or summer repairs. If shortages continue for another month, buyers could see the sticker price for new vehicles go up by as much as $400 before fall. North. Canada is investing $1 billion Canadian dollars to upgrade its steel industry, focusing on electric arc furnaces and stricter environmental standards. The plan is to make steel cleaner and more attractive for markets like the EU. This push for green steel means Canadian exports could soon find new customers abroad, while U.S. producers may face more competition, especially as electric vehicle makers and large infrastructure projects demand lower carbon footprints. For now, U.S. buyers needing green certified steel may have fewer choices and higher costs. In the next 2 months, the price of certified green steel for U.S. construction or auto projects could climb by $45 per ton, adding pressure to project budgets and renovation plans.